This is the movie that Rex Reed called the most horrifying motion picture I have ever seen. This film is positively ruthless in its attempt to drive you right out of your mind. It accomplishes everything it sets out to do with brilliance and unparalleled terror. This is the horror movie to end them all.
Sally, I hear something. Stop! Stop!
This is the movie Rex Reed called the most horrifying motion picture I have ever seen. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. From New Line Cinema.
Let's go, folks. Steve Noise back for another edition of Horror Noise. How you beautiful folks doing? Before I get into today's review, just wanted to make sure that all you guys are staying safe out there. Obviously, as you probably know by now, I'm based in London. We've just gone down into tier 4 lockdown due to a new strain of this coronavirus. So I just thought I'd start this message by saying to all my friends and followers and reviewers out there, just stay safe, folks, because we're in some very troubling times at the moment. So much love going out to all of you. So today we are doing Texas Chainsaw Massacre 1974, the original. Oh yeah, love this one. It's an absolute classic. It's in my top 3 horrors of all time, and is actually it is my favourite horror film of all time. It had the biggest impact for me growing up, and it definitely shaped my evolution into a horror fan. My favourite film of all time is Aliens, the second one. But when it comes to a pure and unbridled, horrific, horrible horror film, Texas Chainsaw Massacre leads the way. It was the one that just introduced a whole new, brutal and gritty and horrible and sadistic style of filmmaking that I haven't seen since, bar maybe a couple of the new French Extremity editions. This film had such an impact on me. It was fucking horrific, and like I said, it's in my top 3 and actually my favourite horror film of all time. So that says it all. Says it all, guys. So the original 1974 version was obviously directed by Tobe Hooper. I can simply describe this film as 1 hour and 27 minutes of pure anxiety. There's nothing else more to say about this film. I think I used the term concentrated grief when it came to Hereditary. This is concentrated anxiety. It's fucking horrible, and it never lets up. You're on the edge of your seat throughout the filmmaking and the style, because it was so low budget, it was so gritty, and it was just the way that this film was produced and directed. You could tell there wasn't a lot of money going into it, so they had to work with what they had, and what they did in shaping this horrible paranoia and anxiety in this low budget film. I don't think it's ever been topped. Jesus Christ. So yeah, so the dread and the atmosphere throughout, it just grips you from the beginning. The very opening scene, I mean, it just opens almost like a crime drama, like a thriller. They touch on the fact that this is supposed to be a true story, and it kind of is, but obviously it's in a very exaggerated method. It was based on the serial killer Ed Gein, who I think he was only actually convicted of 2 murders, but in his time throughout his rampage, he also dug up 9 corpses and was actually was found guilty and convicted for mutilating corpses. And what he did was he took these corpses up and skinned them and fashioned almost like trophies and symbols out of these people and their limbs and their skin and their bones. So they latched onto that and produced this film with obviously very exaggerated symbology, but it technically was based on a real life serial killer, and that instantly just gives it that extra sort of element, makes it more groundbreaking, makes it more terrifying. And I think that's the impact this film had. It came out in 1974, and I don't think there's ever been a film that's gripped people in the same way. I mean, The Exorcist, but that's a supernatural entity. This is real life. This was gritty. This was dark, and it was horrible, and they exploited it beautifully. So there's a little thing to address in this film, because I remember when I first saw it, I thought it was one of the most brutal and horrible, violent films I've ever seen in my life. But it was only when I went back and watched like a couple of other viewings, you realise it's actually not that gory. It's borderline a psychological horror. They display what's happening, but the camera will cut away. And I remember thinking it was one of the most gory and horrible and violent films I've ever seen. But it was only on second viewing, and even last night when I tried, beefing up my knowledge, there's actually not that much gore in it. And that, to me, makes a film a hell of a lot more terrifying. I've touched on it so many times now in my reviews. Less is more. And I'm a whore to psychological horror. I'll openly hold my hands up. And I class The Shining and even the Texas Chainsaw Massacre as psychological horror, because they could just turn into a gore fest or a slasher, or and there are elements to this film of those, Nightmare on Elm Street or Jason, but they do so much more with this film. It's an attack on your senses, and yeah, I challenge anyone who hasn't seen this film to watch this and tell me that this film wasn't an all-out attack on all your senses. It was fucking horrible. So obviously in 1974, these kind of films are very, very shunned upon, and it was actually banned in a lot of countries when it came out. Now sometimes when a film's banned, that will give it a lot more sort of prudence. It will give it a lot more of an advantage in the horror community, because whenever we hear about a film that's banned, instantly we're all like, oh, I need to see that. I need to see it like ASAP. So it was banned originally in West Germany, Iceland, Norway, Sweden and Singapore. It was also heavily cut in the UK, and it came out in 1974, and it was only in 1998 that the full uncut version was allowed to be released in the UK on DVD and Blu-ray. So what the fuck does that say about this film? And the messed up thing is that Tobe Hooper, he deliberately cut the gore away because he wanted to try and make this into a PG. Obviously doing a lot of research now, finding all these crazy little sort of facts and these these little things about the film. And he wanted this film to be a PG. Yeah. He wanted all the family to come around and watch Texas Chainsaw Massacre, because what a lovely film. What an absolute fucking nutcase. But I touched on it a minute ago. The budget for this film, $140,000. This film had. Now, I mean, obviously, back in 1974, you're not going to have the crazy production value that they have today, like 250 million, whatever. But 140 grand, and he still somehow managed to make an absolute fucking classic out of this film. There's the figures. 140 grand it cost. It made to date £30.9 million profit. Fucking yeah, out of this world filmmaking. So usually what I do with my films now, I'm doing a non-spoiler review and a spoiler review. But I'm sorry, this is Horror Noise. This is a horror channel. This film came out in 1974. I'm not doing non-spoilers because if you're any self-respecting horror fan, you would have seen this film by now. So the cast in it, you had a character called Sally. Marilyn Burns was the actor. She went through some, when I say suffering, use that term loosely, what this character went through was borderline psychotic. It was just fucking relentless. And yeah, by the end, this character, I don't know how she held it together. I mean, she was obviously losing her mind by the end anyway, but she went through some unbelievable suffering, man. Had a character called Pam in it, played by Terry McMinn. Drayton, that was the father in it. He was played by Jim Sidell. And of course, Leatherface, the big psychotic maniac in it, was played by Gunnar Hansen. R.I.P. Gunnar. Recently passed away. Don't know if it was recently, maybe about 5 years ago. So getting straight into it, the opening scene, it's they have almost like a sort of police like script come up, talking about the horrors and everything that's going on in the local community, and it breeds again this whole true story element to it, and instantly your back's up because it adds a sort of element of realism to it, and the score in it is just terrifying. Again, it's quite low budget, so it's not all like symphonies and orchestras or anything like that. They just use these horrible sort of sound effects and these little like it's just these really uncomfortable, anxiety-driven noises to it. And you see it at the beginning when they're taking these sort of photos, these photo shoots of these dug-up graves, and it adds just a sense of unease and anxiety, literally from the off. So it starts out quite a sort of, you know, usual kind of story. 5 teenagers, they're travelling across Texas, I assume, heading to one of the characters. Their dad has a house out in the middle of Texas, so they're going there for the summer, just to, you know, to relax, the party, whatever. And then again, the opening scene, they're using like the camera zooming in on just roadkill. Now, for any other film, it would just seem like that's a nothing reference. But again, the raw, gritty style of it, they just zoom in on this. I think it's like an armadillo just splattered on the side of the road, and it just breeds like this unease. You know that something's not right here. And this is a film that makes you feel like, I'm not sure if I should be watching this. I mean, I watched it when I think I was about 15, but I watched it again last night, and it still had that same feeling to it. And Tobe Hooper's, you know, filmmaking was just anxiety breeding to a T. So they pick up a hitchhiker, and to say that he was a bit of a weirdo is, yeah, the biggest understatement ever. There's a quite weird sort of tone when it comes to mental health in this film. You have this, obviously, the hitchhiker that they pick up. He clearly has mental health issues. You got one of the characters, Franklin, he's in a wheelchair. He has mental health issues. Leatherface has it. It's one of the most uncomfortable things in this film. They don't deal with mental health very well in this. They stigmatise and make them feel like freaks. And I think that breeds some of the anger that some of these people are then lashing out on these innocent people. But a little bit like what I said with The Witch, there's some of these little tones in it that make you feel very uncomfortable, and it sort of leads into the reason why these people are treating these, you know, these teenagers the way that they are. So the hitchhiker they pick up, he's acting very strange and starts, you know, slicing his own hand up and saying, "Would you ever like to do this? Look, watch this, watch this." Almost seeking approval from slashing his own hand up, taking photos of the group. And they were like, "Look, I don't really want you taking photos of me." He's like, "Oh, sorry," and sets fire to the photo in this little van that they got. And yeah, then when obviously everyone's freaking out, he then starts to attack the people with this like, you know, this cutthroat blade. It was a very intimidating and horrible scene that left you knew that something, you know, the mark was left on this group instantly by this absolute freak. So after that, they pull up in this gas station, and they get chatting to the locals there, and little did they know that one of the locals there is actually the father of this group, these freaks, these cannibals. And they tell him obviously where they're going. So he's just like, "Oh, you don't want to go up there, you want to stay around here," and da 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 da. But now again, like I said in the previous scene, the card's marked, and they know exactly where they are and where this group of teenagers are going to be to carry out their horrific acts. So they get to, I think it's Franklin's dad or granddad has this beat up house out in the middle of nowhere in Texas. I mean, the place is derelict, like there's no electricity, the place is literally fucking falling apart. So the group of teenagers, the ones who, you know, are able-bodied, because obviously Franklin's in a wheelchair at this point, they start going off and doing the usual thing. We want to go skinny dipping, we want to do this, that all these young people would do in these kind of films. And they leave Franklin there looking around the house, and instantly there's bones, and there's just these like animal sacrifices and just left in the middle of the floor, and then there's all these little symbols hanging up in doorways. So Franklin's obviously freaking out, trying to get the group to come back, but it's too late at this point. They've already, you know, ran off and done their own thing. You see this one couple, they're sort of exploring the area, and they come up to this big ominous looking white house. I think you know the one I'm talking about. And yeah, the guy, he for some reason, I think they're trying to get some petrol or some food or something. They go into the house, knocking on the door just to see if anyone's there. No one answers. He goes exploring, and then my boy Leatherface turns up, and he just dashes out of this fucking down this corridor and just smashes him over the head with a huge hammer. And it's just that entrance, it was just, oh god, it was fucking terrifying, and it was so shocking. There was no build up to it. You know, any of these kind of Hollywood films or these slasher films, you'll see the character, you'll see the big bad guy hiding behind a tree, or you hear the breathing, or you'll hear the musical score pick up, and you just know that something's coming. There's nothing. There's not a single warning about what about is just to happen. And he comes out and smashes this geezer over the head with a hammer. And again, the score, they use like animal noises, like pigs screaming and stuff, and then just drags him back into this room, and then this big metal door just and then I watched it last night, and it just bred a lot of that anxiety back from the first time I watched it. It was just no warning, just smash mouth. And yeah, once you saw that scene, you knew that you were in for a fucking horrible roller coaster ride. I've seen the making of this film, and the conditions on site were horrific. It sort of reminds me a little bit of the Shining and what Stanley Kubrick did to Jack's wife in that. I can't remember her bloody name now, but she was put through some absolutely horrific bullying and almost torture, but this was on set. Stanley Kubrick was not happy with her performance and made her do, I think famously, like do a scene like 120 times because he wanted to breed this upset and this horrible anxiety out of her character, out of the actor. And it's pretty much what happens in this as well, because it's so low budget and it's on site in Texas in the middle of summer. It's daylight and they're using all of these horrible fucking real life dead carcasses of animals and bones just lying around the place, and you can see that it's, you know, it's visibly you know, making a lot of the actors sick, and you could just see the desperation. There was a scene again when another one of the female characters, she comes in looking after, trying to search for the bloke who just got smashed over the head with a hammer, and she finds a lot of the sort of animal carcasses and she's heaving and throwing up. I watched a lot of the behind the scenes footage of that, and that's all genuine and it's all real. And again, it adds to this realism. This isn't green screen, this isn't animatronics, this is real, gritty, horrible on-site stuff. And you can see it on screen by the actors and the actresses' performances. It was just fucking horrible. So the group ends up getting taken out one by one. The girl who then comes in looking for a fella, he ends up, she sees a fella like almost locked up by this big sort of DIY device, and Leatherface then sees her, picks her up and puts her on the spike, and then sticking the chainsaw through a fella while she's, you know, basically hanging there watching him. Oh God. And then one of the most iconic and horrible scenes for me personally is when Leatherface just done these horrible actions to these two characters, and he just sort of sits there and looks out the window, and then the camera zooms in on his face, and he's wearing someone else's skin as a mask on his face, and he's just looking out the window just like this, like, and you hear like these chicken noises or something, like all these animals in the background. He's just sitting there looking out the window like licking his teeth and, oh God, oh fuck, oh man. It's like everyone talks about like Freddy or Jason or fucking Michael Myers. My favourite big horror villain of all time has always been Leatherface. He's so fucking intimidating and he's so psychotic, but he's almost got this vulnerability to him. He's just like a big kid. I'm going to mention the sort of mental health things in this film. I've previously mentioned it, but there's something clearly not right with this guy mentally. And rather than just, you know, these people nurturing him and helping him, they're feeding into whatever anxieties this guy's got, or his mental health, or his learning disabilities, and they're forcing him to commit these horrible acts. Because sometimes you can see it in Leatherface's, you know, posturing or his body language. After a time, he doesn't want to do half these things, but he's bullied into it by the family. So he's such a complex and amazing character, and for me, he's my favourite big villain. You know, the big five, I think they call it. He's by far my favourite. All hail Leatherface. So after a lot of the sort of other characters are taken out, you have Franklin, who's obviously in the wheelchair, and is with is that his sister, or is it they're related somehow, Sally, and they're desperately trying to search for their friends, and they're going through this forest whilst he's on the wheelchair. So instantly your back's up, your anxiety, because this guy's in a wheelchair and he's trying to go through a fucking forest. And then Leatherface appears and sticks a chainsaw straight into Franklin. But again, the similarity of it, you don't see it. You don't see the chainsaw actually going into his face or his chest. It's just suggested. And again, sometimes this is just far more productive for me as a horror film. I don't need to see everything. You know, I watched this horror film recently on Shudder. It's called Terrified or Terrifier, the clown, and he's chopping the bird up, and you know, she's hanging down by her legs, and he chops her up from the noonie downwards, let's just say. That was fun. It was a fun horror film, and not once did I take it seriously, or you know. But what they did in Texas Chainsaw Massacre, they showed you less, and your brain made up the rest, and it just fucking terrifying. So Sally's obviously screaming to get away from Leatherface, stumbles across this house, and that's when this film is already probably ramped up to a 9. It goes up to a 50 at this point, and it turns into just some horrible psychological horror and terror that this character Sally has to go through, and it just goes on and on and on and on and on, and it's just, oh my god, there's no stop to it. You know, initially she stumbles across the granddad, who's just like a fucking, I don't know, he's just like a corpse, and he's just barely alive, and they're cutting her finger and trying to feed him blood, and he's sucking on the finger while she's screaming and looking around. They're tying her up in the dinner scene and stabbing her, just like getting tiny little blades and just stabbing her on the arms. And Leatherface then comes in, she's screaming, and they're all like, yeah, fuck her up, fuck her up. It's the bullying side of it I was saying about the family. And it just goes on and on. Oh my god, it goes on for a good 20 minutes. And that Sally actor, Marilyn Burns, her portrayal of this character was fucking terrifying. But your heart had to go out to her. It was so brutal and sadistic, and you know, again, the camera work and the producer and the director of this, oh, it's just absolutely terrifying. Like, you see it, like they keep doing these shots of her eyes, and her eyes just going like this, like freaking out, and then you got that horrible little soundtrack. Oh, it's a style of filmmaking I haven't seen replicated, at least not to this level. It was fucking terrifying. It was so bad, and this just goes on for about 20 minutes, and it's an all-out assault on all your senses, and you're just praying for it to end, either kill this poor girl or somehow she gets away. And she manages to stumble out, and the family are obviously chasing her out, and Leatherface comes out with a big fucking chainsaw. She manages to wave down like this big, huge 4x4, this big truck that's coming past, and Leatherface obviously goes to attack them both, and this guy ends up throwing a wrench at him and hits Leatherface on the head, and he drops the chainsaw and it cuts his leg. Now that was that scene actually happened in real life. That was a real life on-site accident, and rather than obviously cut it, they said no, keep it in. So that scene where the chainsaw nearly cuts off Gunnar Hansen's leg was real. And if that doesn't set the tone for this film, I don't know what does. Fucking brutal, absolutely brutal. So then Sally manages to wave down another vehicle, whilst, you know, Leatherface is desperately trying to stick a chainsaw in her face, and she gets away, covered in blood, screaming, like you know, she's absolutely fucking losing her mind by this point. The end. And that's it. The original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974. Yeah. If you haven't seen this film, what the fuck are you doing? But if you haven't, please, please, please be assured this is an all-out attack on your senses, and it will leave you feeling very, very uncomfortable. It was groundbreaking, and it changed cinema, especially the horror industry, forever. Lots of films have tried to recoup or tried to copy that style, never got anywhere near it. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 was a fucking embarrassment. We've had multiple fucking remakes and sequels that got absolutely nowhere near this film, and that proves just how good Tobe Hooper was in producing this film on a budget so low. He could still outdo all of Hollywood and all of these hundreds of millions of dollars that they had in production and being able to produce these films, and he outdone them in 1974 with, what was it, $140,000, and he can outdo Hollywood now with all of the clout and all of the money they got. Groundbreaking. It's absolutely groundbreaking. This film changed the genre, and yeah, I cannot big it up enough. So I'm going to get to my rating now. So Steve Noise, Horror Noise, I'm going to give it a 10 out of 10. Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the original 1974. That's very important because there's so many. If you go searching for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you're going to see about 5 or 6 films. Probably even more than that, actually, what am I talking about? But this one, the original masterpiece. Absolute fucking masterpiece. 10 out of 10. It's in my top 3 of all time. My favourite horror film of all time. And it is raw, gritty, dark, and fucking horrible. One little last note. All the sequels that came out, there was only one that I thought that actually did the franchise justice, and that was Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Beginning. I really enjoyed that film. It gave a sort of backstory to the whole family and Leatherface, which I know sometimes is not, it's frowned upon sometimes in the horror community. But I thought Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Beginning is the only one that actually lived up to the billing and done the original franchise justice. So, anyway, that's me. Horror Noise, Steve Noise. Take care, folks, and please be safe in these horrible and worrying times. Much love. Leave me a comment, please. You know, the channel's not really going anywhere at the moment, so I'd really love to get those numbers up. Please leave me a comment. Please share, please like and subscribe, show to all your friends, try and get this channel up, because if we keep getting some more numbers, I'll do more reviews. But if it carries on like this, I'll just, you know, keep it to once a week or once every 2 weeks. I'd love to be able to do some more for you guys, but at the moment, obviously, you know, I'm only working part-time at the moment, but if I can somehow get this channel a little bit bigger, I'll gladly and happily do more reviews for you guys on a more often basis. So anyway, much love. Steve Noise, take care, folks. Much love.